So, hey guys, the Duelist Cup is coming relatively soon. So, today I thought I would just go ahead and make a video on just about all of the most relevant decks. So, we're looking at Stun, yep, normal summon Fossil Dyna, and then you do something else. You might do Runic, you might do Cash, you might do like Bulgonda. It's all about the same, really. Whatever the case, you're getting stunned out, you'll probably be seeing some Fossil Dyna with some Moonmere Shield. So, depends on the exact build. So, different cards are effective against different stun builds. So, for example, against Runic ones, Evenly might be a little bit better. And even if you do have Cosmic Cyclone, that's only enough to deal with one back row. So that might be enough to deal with Moonmere Shield, but it won't be enough to deal with Solemn Judgment and Fossil Dyna. So the best two options are something between like in general, sometimes it could be Red Reboot, but like against Runic variants, the issue with Red Reboot is if your opponent has some Runic quick plays, specifically like destroy a special summon monster, or perhaps a monster will not be destructible by battle because of this card effect or whatever. So could be any of those. It's just kind of RNG, but in general, Evenly and Red Reboot will be your best friend. So if you have both, you're going to have a good time. Maybe. You still need a normal summon to deal with Fossil Dyna. Fossil Dyna isn't too big, it's just 1.2k. But if we look at, for example, Snake Eye, with the exception of if you have the field spell, uh, 0 attack, 900 attack, 800 attack, and 700 attack, meaning you cannot beat over Fossil Dino with any of your normal summons. And might as well, while we're here, Jet Synchron. This also does not beat over this. Your only answer is probably to grab Subversion to go ahead and kind of like just put Fossil Dyna in the back row. So to do that, you have only exactly normal summon Poplar. Snake Eye Ash can help you get there, but that'll probably be too little too late, honestly. No matter what, you probably want either like Divine Temple of the Snake Eye to maybe move this by battle, because then the attack on this becomes 1900, or you want Subversion. So either way, it's not too great. You still need like some kind of special summon extender if you do normal summon Poplar, because Poplar doesn't actually summon from deck for whatever reason. And making Link Karibo with like Snake Eyes Poplar pass is not really going to win you the duel. But yeah, stun is a pretty big issue actually. The issue isn't necessarily that stun will be good. It's just that if it gets played, it's a major pain in the ass and the outs aren't really there. So going first, stun is very hard to deal with, to be honest, because you still need a bunch of other techs for all these other decks, right? And for example, like cards like Raigeki aren't that generically useful. It is useful, however, against specifically like Labyrinth, for example, but not so useful against like well, Snake Idea Bellstar. So if I were to Raigeki this board, this would just allow my opponent to make Apollosa, and then that will probably send Flamberge, and then Flamberge effect will bring back some of the little Snake Eyes, and then those are targets for Promethean Princess to pop. So still the same amount of interaction on the board overall, and of course, IP makes it so Apollosa made with IP is not destroyed. So not that useful. And also Harpy's Feather Duster is less useful against stun than it is like certain other decks with like back row. But it's not that useful against something like Mathmech, for example. So, pretty mid. Gotta say, Duster is like just RNG if it's good or not. And it's not that consistent, and it's not just yeah, it's got a lot of issues, so just I think evenly matched is way better than Duster right now in the current meta. Doesn't help that like every single back row deck ever now has a way to somewhat deal with Duster. Unless your opponent is going out of their way to play like a somewhat worse deck than like what we have here. Like for example, Ninja would get railed by Duster, but who's playing Ninja, right? So yeah. But anyways, they get railed by evenly too, so nothing really changes. I can't really think of a deck where you would need to get rid of every single one of their back row, because if you have like 6 cards and maybe some form of hand traps, hopefully you have Ash, specifically Ash, because it'll stop like certain plays, like with Labyrinth. Big Welcome can't resolve, Welcome cannot resolve because of Ash Blossom, and then you'll probably be okay, honestly. So yeah, moving on from Stunlow, finally, Fallen of Albaz, Branded. So Branded is actually pretty good right now. It's pretty strong for a variety of reasons. So notably as a good matchup against Mathmac, as a good matchup against Diabellstar. So first off, you run Super Poly, allowing you to Super Poly away Whale, and also being able to Super Poly away IP Masquerena. So all you really need to do for this is to put like one more, well, take out 1 card from your extra deck because you're already running 3 copies of Super Poly, right? So then you have enough room for the Ignister. That's actually the target for getting rid of IP and Whale. And yeah, you're fine after that, pretty much. And also, of course, Bestials can banish like IP, and that's a decent form of removal. You can also banish like Linkribo against like uh, Borlode Savage if you think that's necessary. Depends on the exact situation, I guess. And of course, going first, you still have like pretty decent options as well. So not a whole lot to say about this. And then Mathmac, well, the issue is mostly with just how strong like generic Cyber stuff is and how everything is an extender. For Cyberse, Ash Blossom Joy Spring is an extender because they can link it off for Almirage if they normal summon it. Same with like pretty much every other hand trap you can normal summon, right? And of course, if they have like Parallel Exceed, normal summon Ash, link off Add for Almirage, Parallel Exceed, and then even if you were to drop Ash Blossom Joy Spring on Parallel Exceed, um, well, actually with Parallel Exceed specifically, if you Ash it, I think there's nowhere you can go from that. But if it were like a normal summon Dotscaper, that's a bit more rough. If normal Dotscaper, send Dotscaper, special back Dotscaper, and then Splash Mage, bring back Dotscaper. There is no real point where you can Ash this. And that allows you to go all the way to Terahertz, and that's not even like technically one of your starters. That's one of your extenders, and you can use it to like do a full dead-ass combo pretty much. So yeah, could get into it more, but yeah, in general, Cyberse kinda hand trap resistant, and the end board is kind of annoying. So with the end board for Mathmac, you're going to end up seeing like uh, a back row, which is technically going to be Tashula and an Omni Negate, and then you're going to have a Spell Trap Negate, and then a generic Trigger Omni Negate, or it can be something else, but whatever. It's just, in general, not going to be a fun time. And also, they draw too, so you'll have to deal with hand traps. The major weakness for a lot of these decks so far, same weakness, back row. So, Labyrinth and in general back row decks are going to do fairly well going first. And going second, they have the advantage of not having any interaction to necessarily have to deal with. So, example with a lot of Snake Eye builds, there is usually only 1 or 2 pieces of interaction, if any, Notably, the one piece of interaction with backrow is just going to be like Warlord Savage Baron, and I don't count the Omni Negates really as interaction. It's more so like Baron Pop. Aside from that, you have literally no backrow removal. But which is like a little sad, but yeah. That makes like any backrow deck just a nightmare because you don't run any backrow removal. So yeah, that's kind of how it goes. So obviously for Duelist Cup, if you want to climb as high as possible, we want to win as much as possible. So looking out for uh going second and going first, like just dealing with all these matchups is something you have to somewhat consider, like options for. And in an ideal world, of course, you'll have something that can deal with essentially everything here. And I guess with Runic is just Runic Stun. So yeah, so back row, Runic Stun, all of that needs to be dealt with, and you'll still need a way to deal with like Mephic Circular, you'll need to be able to deal with Branded, and you'll need to be able to also somewhat deal with Snake Eye. So the notable thing that you have to deal with Snake Eye is just, well, some way to play into their board would be helpful. So their board is actually really annoying. It's actually way worse to deal with than notably like Labyrinth or uh with like Branded to an extent. It depends exactly what you have. But like with Branded, you'll have to deal with Super Poly. So if anything on your board at any time can be used to make Garura, that's not great. Mud Dragon, also not great. Starving Venom, yeah, not great. And also you have to contest with Mirror Jade, and then Mirror Jade again. And maybe they bring Mirror Jade back a third time. And maybe Mirror Jade's on the board still to begin with, so you'll have to deal with 3 Mirror Jade banishes, and then the follow-up from that if you cannot find lethal. Now, how do you get rid of Mirror Jade? I do not really know. I guess you would have to do like maybe Ultimate Slayer to return it to the extra. That might help, but yeah. Overall, not doing great there. And then let's see. Against the Snake Eye board, it's also pretty annoying actually. An Apollosa that's not destructible with 3 or 4 activations, so that many monster negates, and then destroy one of your special summoned, or actually not even. So specifically, Promethean Princess allows you to destroy any of your opponent's monsters, I believe, but the trigger is specifically if a monster is special summoned to your opponent's field. So yeah, that's a bit annoying. And then we have Super Heavy Samurai Prodigy, Wakuchi. So, Super Heavy Samurai. Going first, like, Super Heavy Samurai is barely hand trap resistant, which makes them annoying. Unless that hand trap is named either Dimension Shifter or Droll and Lockbird, which is ineffective against Labyrinth and not very effective against Diabellstar. Um, in case of Dimension Shifter, it's not effective against Labyrinth, but it's effective against Diabellstar and Super Heavy Samurai. And also like Mech, and also uh, against Branded. Jolt can be effective, depends on your opponent's exact hand. If, for example, normal summon a Luber, it's already too late for Joel, sadly. But a good amount of the time, your opponent will probably be trying to Ash bait. It's just something that a Branded player is going to be hardwired to do because Ash Blossom Joyous Spring is going to stop Branded Fusion by itself. But if you realistically think about it, if you already know your opponent's on Branded, you'd never get baited by Ash. Like, yeah, you'll always just save it for Branded Fusion. It's just like no chance that ever happens, right? So either way, you'll probably be able to droll. Uh, if they have a hand that's rollable, it's probably going to be drolled. Even if they could have technically played around it, they probably won't. So you'll be fine in that regard. Against Mathmech, Droll is literally useless. Like, their hands, like, where they just search one time. And even if that one search is just mathematics circular, that's honestly probably enough for them to an extent. So doesn't really accomplish a whole lot. And yeah, that's most of these decks covered. And of course, there's Kashtira, because Kashtira can play Shifter. It will counter a good amount of these decks. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So if we look at the deck that counters the most decks right now, it's probably going to be Kashtira and Runic Stun. So Labyrinth is actually a little bit worse than Runic Stun because it loses the matchup. You can't really run backrow removal here. So yeah, not much you can do. And notably, your primary form of backrow removal is probably going to be like something like Labyrinth, which can't activate because of Fossil Dyna, and you can't run over Fossil Dyna because Moon Mirror Shield. You know, so this successfully floodgates out like Lab. So yeah, it has a better matchup, and you also have some backrow removal with Fountain anyways, so you have 2 copies of Runic Tip, which can be used to search uh, copies of Runic Destruction, so you have essentially still 3 copies of Runic Destruction, so that's just like 3 copies of MST that essentially recycle themselves. So, in my opinion, that does not really sound fun. And then, which one was this? If this card on the field is destroyed by battle, regret effect, you can target 1 Runic quick play spell in your graveyard, add it to your hand. How annoying. So, you kind of have to deal with that. Okay. So, just in general, Runic Stun. If it goes first, it pretty much beats every single deck here. Like, which is super annoying. If we look at it though, not every single deck here actually is that good. So, for example, Super Heavy Samurai though, let's see. It can beat Labyrinth. It can beat, uh, it can probably beat, uh, to an extent, yeah, Snake Eye, the Star. It cannot always beat Cash consistently because Dimension Shifter is not something you can play around, so that's a thing. Mathmech. Mathmech can easily have Droll for you. Snake Eye is like iffy, but Mathmech has more space, I think, for non-engine. So you're probably going to get washed by these two a good bit, and attribute-wise, I think Super Poly is still in the cards here for like uh branded, and they have the target now and the justification to run it. So that will deal with a lot of what you have. So that removes your spell trap negate, and also your Omni negate isn't going to necessarily work because it can be run over by battle. So that's actually a bad spot to be in, I think. But in general, like, your going second ability isn't that great on Mathmech unless you just have the right hand traps or like the right deck and they can't extend through it. That's mostly what you're looking for. For Snake Eye is like somewhat alright balance wise. They have a little bit of non-engine that like works with their engine for going second, but it's not like that significant. If you actually think about it to an extent, like subversion is like good int, you know? Like for example, you can grab subversion off of a normal summon, but like that normal summon could have been used to like combo anyways, and you'll still need like that kind of combo, right? So like if we were to Poplar search literally anything, we don't care. We are negating that anyways, right? So even if you have subversion in the deck, you're not going to get to subversion anyways, nor are you going to get to original sinful spoil. So it's about the same if you think about it in that regard. So that's kind of the perspective of which, if you were playing Super Heavy Samurai, I would assume you would take that stance. So pretty situational, right? Now we're going to focus a bit more on um, what is really effective against all these decks. So we'll start with this. So we have uh, a card that wins, like, going first, pretty much, against all of these decks, aside from, like, notably Stun. We have Deck Lockdown. You play Deck Lockdown, neither players can add cards from the deck to their hand, except by drawing them. Monsters cannot be special summoned from the main deck. Destroy this card during your second standby phase after activation. So against Mathmech particular, this is probably the least effective against Mathmech specifically. But specifically, this will stop your opponent from getting into circular. They will not be able to use Alan Bershin's effect to search, and it will stop all of their searches straight up. So if they do not have circular in hand, it's likely a game loss. And that's about it for this. Not a whole lot more to say, because for some reason, Mathmech summons not from the deck, but from the graveyard over and over again, primarily, and they even have some Foolish Burial-like effects. Why does Zombie World not have this? Ugh, pain. But anyways, moving on. Branded specifically can be fine if they already have their one of Branded Fusion, but aside from that, this will completely stop any chances of getting into Branded Fusion, so that there's no chance you'll be able to really search, I don't think. So, searching Branded Fusion, yeah, it's probably not gonna happen. And yeah, that's about it for this, I guess. So, you cannot go into Grant Gugnol, you cannot you cannot search Branded Fusion because you cannot add cards. You can still try to Foolish Burial, but it'll be pretty hard to get Serenir and Albion to where they need to go. So yeah, it's probably not gonna happen. You can't even, like, assuming you have Branded Opening, you can't even use the effect to special summon there. Nor can you use the effect to add. It actually stops both, which is a bit brutal, but alright. Against Kishtira, all of the Kishtira monsters essentially search, aside from, like, Riseheart, Pure Cash, and Scareclaw Cash. But you can now no longer Theosis as well as search with any Kishtira monsters. And this also stops the field spell from working, Planet Pathfinder from working if that is being played. So, yeah, pretty solid overall. All you have to deal with is probably just a special summon Cash monster, and you'll be fine. And then we have Diablo Star Snake Eye. So, although Droll is not effective, it's not as though Snake Eye, Diablo Star does not search. They do search a good amount. And also, they do special summon from the deck. In fact, that's primarily what's going to be happening, right? So, deck lockdown is going to be easy clap, easy win. So, let's list all the cards you cannot activate anymore. Wanted, Seeker of Sinful Spoils, Original Sinful Spoils, Snake Eye. Those are no longer activatable. And then we have Snake Eye Ash, both effects. Oak, effect to special summon from the deck. Poplar, effect to search. All of those effects are now not doable. So the only thing you'll probably be able to do is normal summon a guy for no effect, or you can special summon Diabell Star for an effect. But Diabell Star can only set Silvera or Original Sinful Spoils, or I guess another copy of Seeker of Sinful Spoils. Which, all things considered, does not accomplish much. You might as well have just done nothing. It's just a much worse version of, like, special summon, like, Kishtira Unicorn. So, yeah, that's pretty good. And then against Labyrinth, yeah, you need to special summon from deck in order to play Labyrinth, essentially. So no matter what back row you kind of, like, grab, they're all worthless. So, yeah, not too much to say about that. And while we're at it, deck lockdown also will be able to probably stop. Well, let's read. Neither player can add cards from the deck to their hand except by drawing them. So if we go to Nadir Servant, send one monster from your extra deck to the graveyard, then add one dogmatic monster or fallen of Valbaz from your deck or graveyard to your hand. So technically, if you do have, for some reason, a dogmatic monster or fallen of Valbaz that is in your graveyard, you can activate it under deck lockdown. But deck lockdown is mostly a card for going first. So if I do deck lockdown, you're likely not going to be able to deal with this. And yeah, you're not going to be able to send a monster from your extra deck to the graveyard because you cannot add a dogmatic monster from your deck because of the effect of lockdown. So it also turns off Nadir Servant. So that helps with stun a little bit if it's a variant that's playing Nadir Servant, which a lot of them are because they have nothing to do with the extra deck anyways, and this at least becomes like a copy of Garura. And also, you only need to run one copy of Ecclesia, because it also adds back from the graveyard and not just from the deck. So, yeah, that's a bit annoying, but it is completely stopped, basically, by deck lockdown. So deck lockdown essentially affects every single deck to some extent, and it completely wins against some other decks. Noticeably, you can't play this with something like a Vanquished Soul or like a Labyrinth if you're playing those because you need to special summon on your opponent's turn. So any deck that special summons on your opponent's turn essentially cannot play deck lockdown. But for those that don't, you can easily full combo and then activate lockdown, and then your opponent is just completely screwed. Simple as that. So just for example with Kashtira, I can full combo end on my Arisar and whatever else I end on, and then I can drop deck lockdown. And now you're under macro. Droll. And also you cannot special summon from your deck. Alright, go ahead and play, I guess, right? Surely you'll be fine. Or if I were playing Math, I will go ahead, full combo, and now I have Spell Trap, Negate, and 2 Omni Negates. And also I draw twice. Those are draws, not searches, right? So specifically adding cards to the hand, except by drawing them. So we're still allowed to draw with Heat Soul. So now contest that under deck lockdown. Considering that every single one of these decks gets completely shut down, right? To an extent, right? So this is completely shut down, this is shut down, this is shut down. This you have a little bit that you might be able to do, but for the most part, you'll be shut down, right? So, for example, if I were to just play Super Heavy Samurai, I full combo and then I drop deck lockdown. Realistically, you're not going to be able to do anything with just a single Fenrir, right? If you could at least activate Fenrir effect to maybe search Unicorn, you might have something, right? But yeah, you have nothing essentially. And with like Vanquish Soul, for example, you have to do like Rosin Search to add a guy, and then you'll need that to set up like Caesar Valley as well. So this also beats Vanquish Soul randomly, although I don't think Vanquish Soul is something you'll be seeing that often. Yeah, Vanquish Soul gets beat by this, and also this stops Take Your Soul. And also it stops Rosin from ever being able to search, disregarding any like need to worry about like normal summon Rosin, special summon Caesar to make your Rosin dodge Imperm or whatever. Yeah, you don't have to worry about that at all because no searching. Worst thing they could do is like normal summon Rosin, revealing like Orger and Rosin or something to destroy a monster, and then nothing. Yup, that's about it in terms of this, right? And then all of these decks don't share like any other weaknesses aside from like maybe deck lockdown. So yeah, there's nothing super significant we have aside from deck lockdown that I have noticed, but in just terms of somewhat certain level of effectiveness, like evenly matched, isn't good, and board breakers generally aren't super great against super heavy samurai. There are certain board breakers that are good against super heavy samurai, but like Dark Ruler No More is just not good against this. It's like alright against this. It's also alright against this, but it's not necessarily going to be enough, depending on what your opponent has exactly. And then not really that great into this either. because all of the effects kind of can get resolved primarily before um, you even get the chance to activate Dark Ruler no more with Mathmech and like just Cyberse in general, right? So not great. And yeah, it is decent against Stun though, specifically if they have Fossil Dyna, if they have like back row like Skill Drain or something like that, or Solemn Judgment. That they probably have that to kind of stop your Dark Ruler no more, which sucks. So not much you can do about that in particular, but yeah. Evenly still has to be considered because these back row decks, uh, depending on how many people are playing them, right? You'll need back row removal. You'll just need it. It'll specifically be for going second, but if you never lose the coin flip, technically, I don't think like Labyrinth or Fossil Dyna, or I mean Stun, are actually problematic at all. So that's the only justification for not running back row removal is simply because you're just the king of games, and that game happens to be winning the coin flip. So yeah, unless that is the case, I would recommend like just some form of back row removal, but that like just Duster is probably not enough, so you'll probably have to settle for evenly either way. And this also helps deal with like transaction rollback a little bit because it still has to get to the graveyard somehow, I suppose. If it gets banished, you don't have to deal with that anymore. So that'll help out a little bit, I guess. And yeah. In terms of generics, this is all I can say, right? If we're looking at specifically a deck that is good into all of these, I'd have to say it's probably going to be Kishtira, honestly, that has the best general matchup. So going first, if we just set up simply a Rise Heart, uh, we can list every single deck you just beat. So in terms of removal, the primary way to play going second with stun is probably going to be Nadir Servant. And Nadir Servant doesn't work because of a Rise Heart. Simple enough. Any card sent to the graveyard is not going to be sent to the graveyard. It will be banished instead. And fair for part A. If part A and part A does not resolve, part B will not resolve either. So they do not get to search out a copy of Ecclesia either. Even if they did have a copy of Punishment, Punishment is a trap. You can easily just banish it. And even if not, Punishment doesn't actually work under macro anyways, because it is specifically required to also send a monster from the extra deck to the graveyard to trigger its effect. If it gets banished instead, your monster is not destroyed, regardless of what they send. They could send Five-Headed Dragon for all I care, right? And of course, a lot of the monsters in the extra deck that are run for like Nadir Servant and stuff like that, the trigger is being sent to the graveyard, which is impossible under a Rise Heart. So that's one. And then two, the primary way to search Branded Fusion, aside from just like normal summon a Luber or something like that, is to go through the graveyard. So no graveyard, that's not possible to search Branded Fusion then, technically. And even if you do have Branded Fusion anyways, Mirror Jade cannot actually contest anything. So Mirror Jade sends for cost from extra deck to the graveyard to banish, which is not possible under macro, which means you essentially just summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon. So, boom, another one down. Mathmech primarily actually is for some reason a graveyard deck now, or just Cyberse in general. So, pretty simple. Yeah, Kishtira. Yep. Macro. No graveyard. Boom, another one down. And then here, these guys send for cost. So, this is like the issue with branded against macro. So boom, that's another one down. Not so great under macro. So and then um, Labyrinth. Well, this has a little bit of a better matchup actually than the rest of these guys to an extent because they're the least affected by macro, but at the same time they still do play Nadir Servant. So that's a dead card potentially in hand. And same thing with like Punishment. so that's also dead. Ice Dragon's Prison, that's also dead. And then, what else do you have exactly? Well, yeah, not that much, because Rise Heart is backrow removal still, at the very least, so it's still going to be favored for you. I don't think it's like super easy to win, as Lab going second against like just cash in general, so you also have like if you have a single Ash Blossom Joyce Ring, I guess, and like Unicorn, yeah, it's one game against Lab. Enough said, I guess. And then Super Heavy Samurai. Yeah, they can't play under macro, so yeah, that's about it. They don't have a play. And then here we have like Runic Stun. So Runic Stun is just pretty bad going second, and just like stun in general. But if it goes first, it's really strong. So yeah, you have either a positive matchup or a completely winning matchup against essentially every deck listed here. So yeah. The only downside, of course, to playing Kishira is that you have so many consistency hits all across the board. For example, Puppy of Birth, 1. Yeah, that's not great. So hitting into Rise Art is fairly consistent, but it can be aggravating if you don't have a way into Rise Art or if you completely break with Cash. But next staple or generic. Macrocosmos is pretty good here. Kind of playable in the same way that like Deck Lockdown is. So for example, if you're doing the mirror actually, this will specifically stop Flamberge float effect, but everything else will still be doable, right? You can still special summon Apo and Promethean Princess, and essentially with Macrocosmos, you're completely winning the game in the mirror. So just for macro, this loses, this loses, this loses, this does not lose, but it's not necessarily good for them either. This helps in the grind game a little bit. And then these guys are completely losing. These guys are not affected early on though, but they will be affected technically later by macro effects. So they're not necessarily bad, I would say. They're just not great, I guess. So kind of good, but couldn't? Sure. Uh, Against stun, not very useful, but just primarily if we were to set up any back row, like even if we were playing super heavy samurai ourselves, we just don't make Regulus because Regulus, or we don't special summon Regulus because Regulus can't send itself under macro. But aside from that, you just have a bunch of Omni negates and macro. How does your opponent play around that? Uh, and they don't. They surrender. That's how they play around it. So yeah, any deck that can run macro and go first, like, and just to live under macro, it's going to be fine. So like, Sprite with macro is perfectly acceptable. You don't care about macro aside from like on the first turn, honestly. So you're fine under these circumstances. And I mean, Kushtira is really good because you can easily run Dimensional Fissure or macro. So Fissure is also useful because notably if I activate Fissure against Lab, this will specifically do a bunch of things. So first off, if you have Maxi, it's not activatable after Resolution, which can force out Maxi kinda, which is nice situationally, but uh, that's more of a going first thing. Going second, it doesn't really help at all. But this will stop Mirror Jade. Mirror Jade cannot send for cost, as we discussed earlier with Arise Art. Same thing with Fissure, nothing changed. And Punishment as well doesn't work anymore. So that helps you against this, and this. Doesn't help you so much with this, doesn't help you with this either. For going second, this has some place. Going first, this affects negatively Lab, this affects negatively Super Heavy Samurai, Math Mech, Branded, and DLL Star. This doesn't shut down as hard as Macro because technically Like with Diabellstar, for example, you can still send spell traps for cost, but in general, it will still stop all of your Snake Eyes cards from activating. Like original Sinful Spoils, even if you have that, you cannot send Diabellstar. You cannot send uh, any of your Snake Eyes cards for their effects because it requires them to send themselves for cost, which is not possible under Fissure. So it's still decent if you can run this as well. But Macro is going to be a bit superior because it's also going to like prevent like Fountain from drawing, for example, which is also somewhat useful, right? And just in general, what we're looking for here is at least, I think so, like a deck that can run Lockdown is going to be really good, right? Because if you're able to run Lockdown, this shuts down like every other deck that's played, like, or just every deck that's being played here. Like, all the decks, aside from Stun, pretty much, get shut down by Lockdown. And then, uh, I guess somewhat worth mentioning is, I guess Lockdown does have an effect against something like a Mirror Jade, not being able to add to the hand, requiring you to set specifically. That is applicable. That this shuts down a lot of certain cards, which is humorous, but yeah. We're mostly looking at a good time here, I suppose. Staple, that's not bad though. Let's see. Change of heart target. Change of heart targets, it's not that great. And yeah, targets, not good then. So, Change of heart is alright, I guess, against Diabellstar if you can specifically bait your opponent into making Apo. So, same thing with triple tactics, I suppose. That'll be fine. If they, well, if you think about it, Snake Eyes players will want to specifically probably hold on to Promethean Princess longer because they probably want to use IP first. And we can abuse that by making them make IP first, and after IP is made, there probably isn't a spell trap removal unless they made Baron or Borreload Savage. If they didn't make either of those two, you can just take their Apollosa, and then you can also use Apollosa to negate hand traps they use on you, or attempt to use on you, and you can also use it to negate Promethean Princess. So that should be pretty solid, honestly. So triple tactics is not bad, or just any kind of like snatch seal type effect seems like alright against some of these guys. So it's not going to be good against Labyrinth because Big Welcome will just return whatever you target and also pop a card in your hand, so you just go -2 off of that play. So that is not good in this case. And against specifically, I guess, Branded, it's not that great because even if you take Mirror Jade, for example, you don't have the targets to send off of, well, to send for Mirror Jade necessarily, so that is a bit awkward. So that's not necessarily a good play, I guess. Aside from that, I think you're probably going to be mostly fine. And while we're here, I'm just curious about something. What was the wording on Invocation? If summoning an Invoke Fusion monster this way. Okay. Whatever. I just had an intrusive thought. Well, don't worry about that too much. Anyway, focusing back on this, we're mostly going to, if we are looking to do well in this next Duelist Cup, we're going to need a deck that does well into essentially all of these elements. These might not necessarily be played because people might not catch on fast enough, which happens, but yeah. In general, one of the reasons though I would, well, I kind of forgot I mentioned this earlier, would recommend deck lockdown if you can play it, is this is not as easy to remove as like something like an Rise Heart. So if we have, for example, Snake Eye has Subversion, Kurikara, and several ways to search Kurikara, and of course Infinite Impermanence. All of these can negate a Rise Art and then allow them to play for essentially for free. Okay, now how many ways do they have to out deck lockdown? Make Baron de Floor. That is your out to deck lockdown, right? So a lot of these decks don't have like good access into backrow removal, of course. So yeah, they just lose to deck lockdown and also macro because of that reason. So forgot to throw that out there, but usually you might see like for whatever reason a one of Lightning Storm or one of Duster, and that is all they have for like lockdown or macrocosmos. But it's not as if this is your entire deck. So just for example, if I was playing Kishtira, right? I will make a Rise Art, right? And then I still have three other cards in hand because one of them is Lockdown as well. So if we just open simply Lockdown plus Unicorn, I have three other cards for you to contest with. Whether I use them as extenders or they are hand traps doesn't super matter, but okay, now deal with deck Lockdown, which is a back row, Floodgate, and you then have the Monster Floodgate of Arise Art. So you can't out both of these with one card, simply put, right? So that's why it's so effective. And even if you're not using like kind of a Floodgate like Arise Art, if I were to have Super Heavy Samurai, uh, even if you drop like Dark Ruler No More on me, can you play under deck lockdown, right? It's just like a very good insurance policy, or it's just winning entirely. Also worth mentioning, I guess, kind of forgot to mention this, is uh, this card is destroyed during your second standby phase after activation. So the first player that can make an action, like after deck lockdown, like assuming both players are restricted by lockdown, is going to be you, the turn player, the guy who activated deck lockdown. Whoever activates deck lockdown can um, just freely play before deck lockdown and freely play after deck lockdown immediately ends, which is kind of a little bit of BS, you know, but it's just what it is, I guess. So, yeah. If we're looking for a deck that can play under these conditions, though, so specifically deck lockdown, you can't do deck lockdown. It's not possible to deal with. And also, Vanquish Soul doesn't have, like, good access into just spell traps in general. Like, you just can't really play with those too well because, yeah, all of your cards require, like, monsters in hand essentially, so it's just not very effective to build a deck this way. So that's not going to cut it, and we'll just go through a few URs I have here. Might as well get through them. So Witchcrafters aren't that great right now. Nothing's changed. Pistols are like just fine in general, but they're usually like a side engine, probably not the primary thing. I don't know if there's a way you could play them as the primary thing, so whatever. And then we have, let's see, Phantom Knights. Phantom Knights. Hmm. Going first, you're fine. Going second is the primary issue, so we're looking for something that can go first and second pretty well. So, I guess you have Rite of Aramasir, which helps you out a little bit. Rite of Aramasir, let's see. You can't grab Draco back because of lockdown. And you also cannot grab Griffin. So assuming you are going first, that's fine. Going second, that's not fine. And it helps a little bit against a lot of these things, but it's not going to really cut it, I don't think. So, for going first, it's like decent insurance, but you could just as well then play something like Punk Therion. But Punk Therion's going second ability isn't good against like any of these guys. Notably, for if you want to go second against Super Heavy Samurai, I think your best options, just considering all the other decks here, is just to slot in Shifter because it affects the majority of these decks pretty hard, and just other decks in general. Shifter hurts too hard, so you just can't realistically give up just Shifter, right? And just having Ashwalls of Joe Spring with Shifter is probably like alright, and then like copies of Imperm don't help that much, but they don't hurt necessarily, I guess. So yeah, not super great, not super bad, but whatever. For going second decks, going second is kind of rough though, honestly. So notably, even if we were to out IP, it's not going to do us that much good. Because we still have to deal with Promethean Princess. So just for example, like this is just a kind of messed up meta, but whatever, I guess then. If we were playing Noomron, unless you draw like enough hand traps for these guys to stop them in their tracks, like assuming you don't have hand traps and you just have going second cards as the Noomron player, right? How exactly do you beat any of these decks? I guess for starters, we can Kaiju to deal with the spell trap negate, but you still have to deal with the back row. So if we try to remove the back row with like Lightning Storm, we already Kaiju'd, and then our opponent can negate Neuron Network now. So yeah, that doesn't really get us all the way there, and that's already like 3 cards. So that's like dropping essentially the equivalent of Raigeki or a Kaiju, and then doing back row removal, and then even at that point, the back row removal might not resolve because our opponent still has potential for an Omni Negate. It's pretty consistent as a 2-card combo to get the Omni Negate with Heat Soul or whatever. So, not great. And also, our opponent has some hand traps, if they are relevant or not. It's a bit situational. So maybe you need Planet Pathfinder to get into Neuron Network, which is not doable with Ash Blossom or Effect Veiler or Imperm. All of those stop Planet Pathfinder from resolving, so that's not great either. And let's see. What else do we have here? Not much. So, going second against Super Heavy Samurai, unless you drop like some hard hand traps, I don't think you can easily break like a 4 or 5 Omni Negate board, or whatever it is that Super Heavy Samurai does, so that is not great. Okay, moving on. Labyrinth, well, you have a lot of back row removal and Kaiju, so honestly, this is fine for Numeron, right? You actually are one of the decks that can and will run back row removal. Cash, yeah, you're not going to be doing that well, so same thing, I guess, as before. If you have Shifter, though, you're actually doing much better because Calling can't be sent unless your opponent hard open Calling. Against specifically Branded, I think you're fine to just kind of kill your opponent. And then I don't think there's a good way to deal with Infinitrack unless you have like Super Poly maybe, and then you normal summon Fallen of Elbaz. Yeah, I don't think there's a super good way to out Megaclops. So yeah, and I think your board can be outed pretty well. It depends on the exact board, honestly, but if remove back row and then just um, Kaiju attack for game, I don't think Branded actually deals with that well, so I think it's a loss, honestly. And the Abilster, yeah, I don't think you can actually get lethal, and your opponent actually has follow-up and a way to out Megaclops with Subversion. So, not looking good. If Promethean Princess pop, if like Flamberge gets sent to the graveyard, summon more guys in defense, yeah, that's actually not killable by Numeron. Unless they like Raigeki you twice, essentially. And also you still have Apollosa for your opponent to kind of contest with. And then after that, still Promethean Princess. It's something that needs to be dealt with, like either way. And if Promethean Princess is, of course, popped, that would allow, or destroyed by battle, that would allow the field spell to be destroyed as well. And if the field spell is destroyed, the attack amps will stop, meaning you no longer have lethal. And Flamberge probably got sent to the graveyard at some point, adding follow-up, so either way, you're pretty doomed. It's somehow a doomer on this one, despite it being like a going second deck like Numeron. So, going second. Not great. Unfortunately, anyways. So, probably need like a pretty good engine to run, and then like some ability to go second with the engine would be preferable. But I mean, if there was something like this, I'd probably be playing it right now, but I can't really think of it off the top of my head right now, of course. Going first, if that's all you care about, there are a lot of strategies you can use, but like if you're really trying to get far, that's probably where it gets a little bit problematic. Is just going second is the most problematic part. Well, I don't really have any huge ideas for going second as of right now, because there's just too much to deal with. But in general, I think the best thing you can do is probably just drop Dimension Shifter. In terms of Dimension Shifter, the only two decks that would be okay are Fossil Dyna here, so stun, and Hishtira. Aside from like that and Labyrinth, you're doing pretty well for yourself, honestly. It shuts down enough decks that it's like justifiable. If you're seeing a lot of like Lab and Cash, you'll still want to run Shifter, but you'll probably want to run something else for these guys. Not 100% sure what you would be running right now. Well, actually, I do, now that I think about it. The really good deck for this is actually Raigeki or Dark Hole, because unless your opponent activates Big Welcome immediately, if you drop Raigeki, if your opponent no longer has the ability to summon Lovely Lab, unless they already have the other one, wait, whatever it's called, the Lady Lab, unless they already have that on the field, Raigeki will completely remove their way to summon Lovely Lab and return a card to the hand, so they won't be able to trigger that destruction effect, and this also outs a Rise Heart. So it's effective against this deck, and somewhat against this deck. But there just isn't that many, there aren't that many options that are super good for going second that work on everything, which is a bit problematic because it's best of one, so you can just lose games and just completely get cheesed out of some wins, so it is what it is. But yeah, if I'm missing anything, feel free to leave it in the comments below. Help everyone out, I guess. So yeah, this is my analysis on all of the current meta decks, I guess, or like decks that I expect will be played at all or a good amount in the Duelist Cup. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.